Good morning, thinkerers, welcome inside. Thinkering minds keep the spark alive.
Welcome everybody to Thinkering Minds, where we explore how learning becomes more human, more curious, more powerful, where we design for people, not just systems, but the things they need to build better learners and a better future for education. Today, we're excited to introduce Lindsey. She's from the Thinkering Network. Lindsey, introduce yourself, what you do, and tell us what's your dream project in education.
I'm Lindsey Tropf. I'm the founder and CEO at Immersed Games, and my dream project is what I'm doing, or I wouldn't have spent my last decade doing it, which is making empowering games for students and for learners to play, where they can do things like learn about climate change or by investigating a coral reef that's bleaching and try to figure out how to solve it, or solve a food crisis by increasing crop yield while learning genetics, and really empowering students to understand the why behind everything they learned that way.
So before you were building games, what were you doing?
I mean, in school, I was working on a PhD in education, and I started doing my dissertation on game-based learning and never finished it, and started this company instead.
Yeah, when you start building, you're just like,
Yeah, it's a little hard to finish it at that point.
I get it. It's like, yeah, you get the information to get through the point you need, and then you're just kind of like, well, now it's time to create something. What was your 2 a.m. moment where you just thought like, all right, it's just time to flip the switch and move into a different mode and start building?
I mean, really developed over a while. I worked with some great people in my time in academia, but it was just so much slower. Like I had a graduate assistantship, and the other students asked me to slow down in my work because they didn't want to work at my pace. And I got very frustrated. I wanted to scale up the work we were doing, and the professors weren't interested in that, and things like that. I got kind of giggled at a lot for my, like, the ways I thought about wanting to scale up the work and wanting to produce it. And
Right.
it just was a bad fit.
What was happening in general academia that made you start kind of questioning how students were learning and thinking that there could be a better way?
I mean, in general, when I was going through my PhD program, I kind of like accidentally made a mental model of how a lot of the best practices linked to game-based learning or gaming experiences, not game-based learning, sorry, because it really doesn't very well. And, that's what we're trying to improve. But I had been a person who was like a guild leader with World of Warcraft, and organized back in the day when it was 40-person raids and all of that. And in that process, if you've never played games like that, you're learning a lot through needing to use it, right? You have these strategies, you are doing metacognition. Every time your group fails, you all discuss how you failed and why, and how you should change your strategy, and you're coordinating, you're collaborating, you're doing all these things. And so then I'm going through this PhD program learning about education, and they're telling us about all these best practices, which are basically the type of learning I did in video games, right? And then also, we had a class where they were telling us about gifted kids and, the things that were better for gifted students. And I started really irritating my poor, instructor, because I just kept raising my hand and going, but that's good for all students, over and over that entire class, because I was getting so frustrated. Like, oh, we need to do creativity and let them pull in their own ideas. Every single strategy was obviously just things that you should be teaching all students that way. And so I think it was coming up against these like limitations of the system. And then when I went into schools, and a friend and I every day for 3 months texted, what horrible things did you learn about the public school system today? And it's not any individual educator's fault, right? It's the systems, the structures that are set up that are just so difficult. And I've obviously learned a lot in the last decade trying to figure out how can we bring the type of empowering experiences in games and get them to work in those systems and structures. And there's a lot of change management involved there in terms of how iteratively you need to think about that I've had to recognize. Like, there's nothing even an individual principal can do about the structure of how school works right now.
I'm going to make a generalized leading statement here, which is like the opposite of what you do in interviews. But like, what was the moment you realized that traditional tools like weren't enough to spark that kind of engagement and, pedagogy and thinking development that you wanted to see?
I mean, I don't know that there's any one moment. Like, we've all lived through it, right? We all went through K-12 school ourselves, weren't as fascinated by things as we should have been. I mean, from being a freshman in high school myself. I remember coming to school really excited to talk about something I had read about for the homework the day before, and I'm thrilled. And I looked around and nobody else cared at all, in the classroom. And I remember my severe like disappointment that no other student cared. But obviously that's like the majority, right? I'm the weirdo that, had that curiosity built in and still had that as a freshman in high school and everything and did all of that. And so, I mean, I came from that point into being an educator, teaching, wanting to bring that in and realizing in my own student teaching, most students weren't motivated that way. And there's, as I think most educators would agree, no reason they shouldn't be that curious. And in the game-based learning literature, James Paul G is one of the kind of famous people who's written some books about it. He's talked about how games are empowering. Students can become leaders in video games and they're making decisions and they're doing all of these things that like the school experience pales in comparison. So like there's no one moment, right? It's all of our experiences on both sides of being the educator and being the student that kind of lets us realize that there's other things we should be doing and better ways to be learning and engaging than most
I
of
don't
us have
come from
access
the
to.
education world, so it's really enlightening for me to see that the educators saw the same thing I saw as a student and they had the same frustrations. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating that I guess we're all the people trying to just bridge that gap. But I was, the teacher would have us do some kind of presentation for our math class, and mine, I read a book about how in space there's non-Euclidean geometry because we're not bound by gravity, and you can have a triangle with 3 right angles. And I'm reading this thing in metaphysics books that it's like way outside what I should be reading.
Yeah.
So I come and do this project where it's a mad scientist is going to blow up the world unless we can figure out how to get 3 right angles in a triangle and all this stuff. And I got an F because you can't do that. And like I bring in this book and I'm like, no, like you can, it's just like in outer space you can. And space is curved, and I'm going into all that stuff. And
Did they
just
change
I
your
remember
grade?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I was
But,
saying, as an educator, that would have made my year. Like, I had 2 kids almost get into a fist fight debating the topic I brought into class, and I was like, oh, I'm so good. I stopped them.
yeah.
Depends on your style as an educator, certainly.
Yeah. We'll let it get a little heated here. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I'm like, okay. As soon as the puff chest, the chest starts getting puffed, okay, we got to stop now.
yeah. But it's so great that, like the students have that passion, and the educators, see that, and want that. And, so the path's clear. We just have to bridge that gap. How do you do that at Immersed Games?
Yeah, and obviously, like, not everything's going to work for every student. There's different approaches. For us, I wanted to use games because of accidentally making this mental model and mapping up all these best practices to video games. I knew there was a better way to do that. And, I think a lot of the game-based learning that people are familiar with is going to be kind of like flashcards or pop-up multiple choice questions that just kind of use the game to reward the kids. And that's not how I've ever thought about it because of how I'm approaching it. I've thought of it as we use the game to set up the shared experience, to set up a reason to care, a meaningful context. And so the students are going in and like sometimes they'd be messaging us, as they're playing it and stuff and saying like, oh, I solved this and, I fixed that problem or I helped this person. And they'd like go on the live chat support and like, I can't talk to you every day, but they're really proud of themselves for solving this problem. So how can we actually use a game to have student agency and set it in meaningful context and just use all these best practices that we're able to like pack into this modality in a way that's much easier for educators to use because I can just pull this game out and do that in a way that like, how do I do that with a regular curricula?
Yeah. In my mind, I'm like instantly going to, the video games have the trophies and reward systems. And can you tie that in to when students make some kind of cognitive achievement, they're getting these unique, AI driven awards based off what they're learning and accomplishing. And then there's this like, it carries over into their portrait of who they are as a learner and all that. It's so many cool things that you can do with, just engaged gaming as an entry point. What was the game that you said World of Warcraft OG vanilla WoW? Like that's good. What was the game that made you realize like, oh, this is I'm learning?
I mean, it was during that. I mean,
yeah.
At my age, I was, playing that as an undergrad and college and stuff as well. So like that was part of the time period where I was starting to become an educator and learn that. But certainly like I played games like Creatures when I was 10 or something like that, that most people haven't heard of, but there was a Black Mirror episode inspired by it recently. So more people are
Oh,
familiar with it now, that has amazing AI and you're teaching these creatures and doing all these incredible genetics things. I didn't understand half that. I was too young. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think all of like the field of those of us in game-based learning recognize broadly that games are good learning. And even books made for regular game designers outside of learning talk about how games are good learning and you have to teach a person how to play the game. And so that's very recognized. It's then just transferring that into an educational context that often starts to break down. You don't get the same interests, you don't get the same affinity spaces, which is these like, communities that merge around it that are part of what makes it so powerful and gets the social learning in. And so my goal when I stepped into the space was to make a game that had that empowerment, that wasn't just using the achievements and the rewards, but was actually like interesting enough to start procking affinity spaces. And so when
Uh,
people started arguing with us about the design of our first game, and a student went and made a guide and figured out all of the math behind our ecology simulator, that was very exciting to me because that's what I was going for here.
that's so awesome. Yeah. Then they made a game within the game, yeah,
Figure that out.
hacking and
How do I
having fun. Yeah.
optimize it? What is the math? How is this model similar or different from real life? And is that problematic, or how does that affect gameplay? Which, by the way, is like a cross-cutting standard within, the next gen science standards, is understanding models and their limitations, right? And that's like
Right.
what comes out of good gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when we talked to Noah Daniel, when we talked to Noah Daniel, our internship, uh, and fellowship, like mentorship imaginator, like what she talks about a lot of times is like, how does support feel, and learning and these kinds of tools are, it's a form of support
Yeah.
and curiosity, engagement, community. Like what do the users report like the learning feels like on the platform?
I mean, some of the students don't realize they're learning because and I don't like that, for the record. I am not one of those game-based learning people that says my goal is for students to not know they're learning. I vehemently disagree with that. I think good learning is incredible and enjoyable, and that is never my goal. But I think they don't realize it's learning only because they're used to that looking like memorizing a fact or answering a question, right? And so sometimes I get pushback from students that they're like, well, I didn't really learn anything. But then we point out the skills that they learned. And when we measure it, they increase their ability to build arguments from evidence, to analyze data and things like that. I think students just don't realize that that's our pedagogical goals now, and that should be our goals more than it's like memorizing something. And so I think that's interesting. They think of it more like when they say what they enjoy, they talk about the learning, but not necessarily in those terms. They're enjoying the exploration, the gameplay, solving the quests, helping people in the game. And we
Yeah,
also know that's tied to gender interest, by the way, right? You might not want to be an engineer, but you want to help people for a career. So it's more like what you're actually doing and focusing on that starts to emerge in those conversations.
absolutely. And it's giving people opportunity to learn while being themselves. And I think that's the I read a quote the other day, when you send your children off to Caesar, don't be surprised when they come back as Romans. And you know if we're just putting them into this box, and like the learners are saying, I'm not learning anything,
Yeah.
clearly we have to redefine what learning is, and a system-wide shift that we have to create so people start looking at learning differently. What is your big takeaway from just like data that's come in that you've looked at? What's like a surprising thing that you didn't expect from all this?
I mean, that's a great question. I think one might be that girls are getting more out of it than boys, like closing
Yeah.
gaps in learning. I know a lot of people expressed concern around like girls' interest because it's games, which isn't really accurate anymore. But we actually have seen in some of our studies that it kind of they learn even more than the boys from it, and then help like close some of the gaps in learning. And I think part of that is us putting it in this meaningful context around that. So yeah, I think that's been one of the surprising things. But a lot was pretty expected because we're just taking all these like literature-based best practices and like codifying them into a game system, and using all of that literature there. So I'm not sure that there's a ton that has totally surprised me. And a lot of it comes out into the actual execution of it, and how am I really going to pull that forward? How do I get this to work within a curricula for teachers? play nice with all the other systems and things like that that they have, which is part of why we pivoted recently to partner more with curriculum companies to remove that friction point.
Yeah. What was the first game, the first tool learning experience that you created?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did was actually a sandbox ecosystem builder, kind of outside of the system we have now where we do these like quests and missions. I guess that surprising area for me as the messier educator, as you kind of see with some of the stuff I shared and your experience where you got an F in that school project. It would have made my year as an educator. I love that super messy learning. So we had these sandboxes, but they didn't really get used. The things that got used were our quest experiences, which were kind of these discrete 15 to 20-minute experiences where we have a problem-based learning scenario that we set up, tied to a specific learning objective, and the teachers can assign it, the students go, they do that, you get assessment data, you kind of complete it, and it's a very like sharp, discrete, easy to implement experience, while the sandboxes are much messier. I'm building an ecosystem from scratch, I'm balancing it. Me as an educator need to walk up behind 30 different kids and very quickly help them if they're frustrated and know the right questions to ask about a model, a simulation. So it was a lot on the teachers. And so I think kind of realizing some of the randomness that needs to be removed from this, because the practical mental capacity of an educator to walk up behind a kid and help them quickly. So we were making some experiences at other points where we had to remove some of the randomness from the simulation so that the teacher knew, okay, I know the answer is supposed to have been this, the model would work this way, or it would be in the state right now. If the kid doesn't realize that, maybe their sampling was bad or something, and kind of simplify that and really spend a lot of time thinking about like, what is that teacher role? How are they going to implement this? How can they actually manage that capacity wise among 20, which is difficult. It's a real challenge.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is your most popular game experience?
I think it was pretty well spread across those things that we had, because then we focus more on building out these quest-based experiences and putting those out. But as I mentioned, right now we've kind of transitioned more recently, so we no longer are selling and offering direct like game experiences to teachers and schools. We're now partnering with curriculum companies and using our infrastructure to help them build these type of experiences. And really, the main reason for that, well, the main two reasons are figuring out how to take problem inquiry-based learning like we do and put it into your curriculum, especially these very complex curricula, is very challenging. And we'd have educators who understood the pedagogy and got very excited, but weren't able to implement it either as well as they wanted or sometimes at all, because they needed to figure out how to get it into their curricula. So partnering curricula companies lets us very explicitly identify needs in the curricula and place it in locations and really just remove all that friction for educators. And then also we were kind of limited with how much we could build. We were building for years and we essentially had like half of middle school science covered. And so being able to partner with people and let them start scaling, we're just really excited about the type of impact we can have in partnering with all these curriculum companies and bringing that pedagogical approach to them instead. So I don't want to promote any civic content because like I don't really have it for people to like go sign up and play right now, unless you want to do middle school math. We do have a Department of Ed grant at the moment building some really fun middle school math content out. We're doing student and teacher co-design. We have several pilots with a research partner on that. So that's something we kind of have direct, but otherwise it's all kind of through curriculum partners right now.
That's really smart, and it's a good bridge where it allows you to do what you do well, and then people come to you with what they need developed, and you get to bridge
Yeah,
that gap.
absolutely.
Designing the curriculum is not fun, but facilitating improvements to the best curriculum is a super fun challenge.
Yeah. That gets back to that change management I mentioned earlier. The same thing happens with curriculum companies, right? I can't go too far because also they're a business and they have to stay afloat. So, I can't make too insane of suggestions. They won't have the resources to revamp a bunch of
Right.
things too. But so how can we kind of feasibly help them add some of this problem-based learning, some of this meaningful applied context, using a game within their curricula and designing the models that help them think about that and do that and kind of push some of their pedagogy forward too. And some partners, I don't want to say like I'm pushing all my partners' pedagogy, like some people we're working with already do incredible inquiry-based learning. So we've been finding other ways we can support them, like bringing things to life in a more visceral way than they're normally able to do. Or there's certain types of evidence that they couldn't figure out how to present without just having the kids read it. And so being able to use video games to let them evidence gather in different ways was really interesting too. And I'll be sharing more about that as we kind of wrap up their work.
Oh yeah, that's actually clever too as an evidence gathering tool. I like that.
Yeah. because they
Yeah,
already do inquiry and argumentation and everything in their curricula. So it was, how can we help them with very specific pieces um,
yeah,
in the flow as well.
yeah. And just and ideas just come to me, ADHD brain, but the mental health side as well, where you can tie in checking in at certain points to certain mechanisms, and as students are going through, they don't even realize that they're building kind of their own diary of who they are and how they're feeling that day, and what their big accomplishments and wins are. So there's so many cool things that you can do with this that it's just puts the standard stuff that we're stuck with to shame. But
I'm waiting
like
for a
to
grant
the
right now for a lot of learning engineering more there, doing a little extra instrumentation to make it easier to collect that sort of thing, A/B test, measure over time, add micro surveys in on self-efficacy, and use that to also just, yeah, very quickly iterate, improve the learning.
That's super awesome. So at Thinkering, we're all about humanizing education. That's like what we're talking about here. It's just making it
Yeah.
fun and engaging. But what's the human side that you're most proud of?
I mean, to me, it is the fact that every piece of learning is tied to an authentic, meaningful rationale. Right. And when students are doing that, it also makes it so much more concrete and like removes a lot of these intimidating abstraction layers. So, for instance, if you're trying to learn about, mean normally, right, you might get introduced to this and it might be kind of intimidating, and students have these barriers. And we're bringing it in a way that like making those steps feels obvious to the students. They're playing this game, they're trying to divide boba teas from surveying customers among this fair share, and they're getting mean. And not a single kid has struggled with doing that, with these concrete representations and manipulatives, and then kind of just scaffolding that up with within this experience. And within gameplay, students expect experimentation failure. It's not intimidating. It doesn't have a threat to their self-efficacy in the same way. So I'm thinking of a moment where one of the students, when we did some in-school testing, told the teacher and told us on the way out that she felt really smart playing this game, and she left, and the teacher had like tears in his eyes and was like, you don't understand, like that student
Like that.
struggles so much and has never said anything like that to me before. And so I think just being able to break down this intimidating part of trying to learn with numbers and textbook questions and all of these things, and making it very concrete for students in a meaningful way of, you were never going to hear why are we learning this, because it's all set in a purpose. It just breaks down a lot of those barriers that really make students struggle, and so we can just very easily kind of scaffold them into these experiences.
We talked about kind of the less visible side and human growth in learners. How do you balance the measurable outcomes with that towards standards?
Balance as if they're in contrast to one another or would have conflicting goals.
Well, that's how I would see it, but maybe they don't. Yeah,
I mean, I don't, but that's also like I
yeah,
focus when we're designing for civic content area, I tend to focus on the practices too more than like the content. So for instance, the next gen science standards in math, they're three-dimensional. They have the content, they have the practices like analyzing data and arguments, they have cross-cutting concepts like thinking through patterns, think of them as lenses of how you think about the world. So when we started designing for that, I actually focus a lot more on the lenses and the actions and what you're doing there. And that's the type of skills we want students to be doing. And it through that you're empowering them anyway, right? Like I am solving this problem, and through all of these amazing things that are giving students type of agency and empowerment and meaning that we want, they're also happen to be learning the content. And that applied perfectly into math when we started doing math work. Math also has a set of practices that you want students to master. So we really think about it as designing around these big overarching practices that are critical to developing members of society, right, with literacy and empowerment. And then through that process, I'm using the content just to fill it in. So like I don't think of these as in contrast. I also never think of fun versus gameplay in contrast to each other. Like all of these are, when well designed, are all just the same thing.
that's why you're the innovator leading the space, and I'm just sitting here behind the microphone. I like that. But it's
It is
interesting
very
because
common for me to question assumptions under questions. It is
no, I like that. I like that. I do the same thing. So
yeah.
one of the, biggest challenges we talked about is learners not even realize they're learning. Do they realize that they're learning about themselves in this when they're gathering all these skills and becoming that, future, we must have you in
That's very
society and we
meta.
need you?
No way.
No?
That one's too bad. And I will say, like, most of them realize they're learning in our game. There's this disconnect of thinking learning is facts and numbers and figures and not
Yeah.
skills, and everything. But that also happened with like the shift to the next gen science standards. For instance, a lot of students push back on teachers the first time they learned with storylines as well. So it's that general pedagogical shift. It's not just our game that causes that confusion for students because it is so different.
When we talk about a new phase you're going into and the whole world's kind of doing a shift, you're bringing AI hour powered authoring. How does that play into what you're building, and how do we keep it human while we're building
Mhm.
these technical tools that we're going to be so reliant on?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing for us was we did not look for ways to put AI into our tool set. We had problems that emerged that over time we have realized AI could be helpful with, in order to hit best practices, right? In order to do the type of pedagogy we want to do. So I mean, don't have much of it built into our authoring tool yet. I do have like a separate prompt setup that helps me with brainstorming and things like that. We're using it to prototype and help with that. The primary thing we're using AI with right now was one of the focuses we really wanted to work on this year with our math work was around strengthening classroom discourse, helping students articulate their thinking, their funds of knowledge that they're bringing to the classroom, get those ideas, and then have really good discussions with their peers and with their teacher and the class. And so once we started saying like, okay, we want students to write their ideas free form in our video game. And then we want to, maybe if they put IDK, if you've ever talked to a middle schooler, they will put IDK. I don't know if you're not familiar, into the chat. How do we want to maybe pull that out? And so we had a problem we wanted to solve because we wanted to make sure students tried to articulate some thinking and got encouragement that AI solves that problem for us. And then once we get all of this text now from all of these students, we want to help a teacher lead a classroom discussion based on students' ideas. Teacher doesn't have time to go through these 100 responses. So we tested this and we have AI sorting through all those responses, categorizing them and picking some maybe like different ideas from different categories, and then putting those into a presentation the teacher can do de-identified on the board to lead a classroom discussion. And so those are these problems that for the practical side of helping a teacher have really strong, empowered student discourse that's bringing students' ideas to the forefront and using those to have these important conversations, AI makes it a lot more feasible. And so we're using it only when there's a problem like that that we want to solve.
Yeah, I think that's the key differentiator between winners and losers in the AI age is, are you doing it for the sake of it? Are you doing it because you actually need to? And when
And
we
there's a lot
were,
of problems it can solve, more and more every day. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But we were kind of amazed when we went to FETC and we were looking around all the new ed tech tools, and it was just kind of like, oh, your AI does what? Oh, it's just a chat GPT layer. Okay. Oh, it's just a wrapper on chat GPT. Oh, yours is just a wrapper on chat GPT. Like, cool. Like there was so much of that, and few people, it just seemed like that was a feature, and it was just like, no, 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 what does your project do? And they're like, no, it's an AI. And we're just like, well, cool. There's a million of those. What does your product do?
And students don't even have the metacognitive skills to like go into a chat and ask good questions, right? To get the help they need generally. So yeah, I'm sure I'm using OpenAI's, API within our conversations too with all of these limits and pedagogical guardrails, but we're putting it in a context and a very specific use case that helps the student rather than expecting them to go they don't know what type of questions to ask, and how
Yeah,
to use it.
absolutely. We use it, to solve a problem too. How do we build a brain for Thinkering Collective? Well, we run every
Yeah.
conversation, transcript, ideation,
Yeah.
iteration, pedagogy, all through it all. And then now we have, our brain and its collective information, and that's a problem solving tool for us. But, people get carried away and they create problems for themselves. With curriculum designers and you bridging, what they're trying to do into the engagement, gaming, curiosity space, like what do they learn from you and take away,
Yeah.
and how do you shift what they're doing, and what aha moments do they
Yeah.
come away with?
I mean, this has been one of my favorite parts, and I am also like gathering a lot of feedback to try to use it to create a training course in the future and everything about what are the kind of skill gaps or ways of thinking that need to change when you go from like regular instructional design to doing it in a game. And again, if you've done problem inquiry based learning, like we're very close, but it's still rare to do that really well out in the field as well. So I think one of my favorite conversations that I had recently, the organization I was working with had chosen to focus on something really boring. And they're like, this will make it a lot more engaging and fun, and we'll see if that helps improve the learning. And then as they started creating the content, they realized the ways that making a problem-based scenario, because this is like the structure of our tool set that like, and I gave them recommendations and how to do it and how to set it up. And it's kind of forced a bit in this pedagogical framework by how we've built this tool. They realized that setting it in this problem-based scenario started making connections for the students. It pulled all the learning together. It took learning and lessons that are normally fragmented and disconnected, and students didn't know how they related, and it helped them be relatable to each other. And so it's really exciting. Like our in with curricula is generally, first of all, focus groups and teachers ask for games. So please, if you're a teacher and you want stuff like this, please tell them you want things like this. So, it comes up a lot. And so they know that they need to do something like this, and they just think like, okay, games, engagement, and we start talking to them, they start building with us, and they start realizing that there's so much deeper that we can go. And some of the stuff has just been more entertaining for me. I think it is a difference, but multiple of our creators, for instance, kind of would set up tasks that kind of just look at some information and move forward, that you could have instead set up for the student to make even a small decision that let them feel like they had some agency. And so it's also just those like flipping of things that it was very similar, that I just had to help them like slightly tweak how they were thinking about it. But the outcome for the player, for the learner, is very different if I'm like being told, go do this task, or asked a multiple choice question afterwards when I could have just been asked it first, and that helped me solve the problem, right? Like I feel like I solved something. I developed this sense of self-efficacy that I'm able to use this information to solve problems. And it's actually a very subtle shift, but a needed one when you're making a video game for sure. And I think across obviously more types of curriculum, it would be great.
It's the like exciting thing we think is going to happen in the next 5-10 years that learners are going to start to expect from experiences through the work that you're doing?
I mean, I greatly hope it's around empowering them to have more self-directed learning that is set in meaningful context. I think everything should have a why behind why we're learning it that's visible to the learner, not just the educator. And it's not only visible in terms of I have to learn the skill if I want to be able to pass the scores, And so being able to connect everything. I know I told that story earlier about being a freshman in high school and being really disappointed that nobody else in my class cared about, the paper that we read and wanting to talk about it. And I think it is that curiosity that has driven me, that I never lost that curiosity and that love for learning. And I mean, it's cliche at this point in education to say that the system starts to kill that out of students. And it doesn't have to, right? And so that's really where I want our game to be able to help bring that back, that if things are set in these meaningful, empowering contexts for students, they should care about what they're learning. And if you start there, kind of everything else really falls into place from that.
That's a good closing spot right there. That's like a nice mic drop moment. Lindsey, where can people find you if they want to contact you, learn more about Immersed Games and how they can connect your ecosystem into what they're trying to build?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can go to immersedgames.com, or our tool now to create learning games is Tyto Authoring Studio. It's Tyto, Tyto online.com. Honestly, the same website, they'll all get you to the same place anyway, so you can kind of click around and find it, or you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn and everything as well. As I mentioned, right now we're mostly working with curriculum companies, not directly with schools, just because it still takes about 2 full-time work days to create an experience in our studio, so it's a little more time than teachers have generally. But we're definitely open to ideas, and we also do have some co-design right now with teachers and students and different research opportunities, especially in math coming up. So love to connect with educators, kind of making a database of educators who want to be able to pilot and maybe introduce them to some of our partners in the future too, for that sort of thing.
Yeah, if you want to get your hands on some cool stuff and tinker with it, contact Lindsey. We'll put the links in the description. Lindsey, we appreciate it. Everybody, until next time, stay curious, stay human, and always keep thinking. And now we're out.
Love the term thinkering, and we'll definitely use it in my classroom. The kids will love it. This is where we can be that peer support network with each other. When the big picture clicks, it's beautiful when you get administrators and teachers together.
You can't be a leader of other people if you can't first lead yourself, right?
Helps the educator have a very clear and structured framework.
Becomes this real community hub. If you're a great educator, you're looking for the most powerful moment. Can we inspire kids to believe that the world needs who they were made to be?
I hope you guys continue to uphold that legacy and continue, finding kids like you.